In Israel, a gun strapped to somebody's hip is a very common sight. Soldiers, security personnel, and yes, even civilians. So much so that roughly 2% of Israeli civilians have personal firearms, according to government data, and an equal number own firearms as security guards. And this in turn has caused many Americans, including the firearms lobby, to compare the two countries. But there are enormous differences. The key difference is that in Israel, owning a firearm is a privilege, not a right, and that's a privilege the government very jealously guards.
Not every person in Israel has the right to carry a firearm. The government decides to give this privilege to people only if they live in a dangerous area according to what the government thinks, or in their work they need a firearm, or they served in a very special unit in the Israeli army, and there are a little bit more criteria.
So what are these criteria? A firearms applicant must work in the security sector, and if they don't, the restrictions are rather tight. They must be 21 years old if they have served in the Army, or 27 if they did not. They must have lived in the country for a minimum of 3 years. A clean criminal record is needed, as well as a clean bill of health and mental health signed by a doctor. They must also live or work in what the ministry deems a dangerous area, conflict zones, settlement blocks, or anything over the green line. But perhaps the biggest difference, though, is cultural attitudes towards firearms.
It is these civilians who have been properly armed who have acted as first responders in many, many cases. And that's sort of become a little bit of the aha moment in at least the last year or two, where the ministries involved, and as well as the police, etc., they sort of said, you know what, maybe we should start allowing more people to carry a gun.
In Israel, with its near universal military conscription, firearms is seen as a necessary emergency tool. In the past 10 years, civilians with firearms have stopped around 50 terror attacks, according to data from Bar-Ilan University. But in America, it's a universal right and has a huge sporting culture built around it, but very limited federal control. And while states and even cities maintain their own laws, some of which can be even more restrictive than Israel's, it's very hard to draw any real comparison between the two countries. Ariel-Levin Waldman, I-24 News.